Well, we just had the Fisher Ambassador meeting, and everybody was there. The uphill skiers, the frontside skiers like myself, park skiers, mountaineers, and it made me think of my parents who were skiing the Canadian Rockies in the early '70s before it was the rage. And I just think about my parents and how cool they were. So they're taking these trips to Little Yoho, the Selkirks, Battle Abbey, Mount Robson, and they're just learning to ski powder. They're learning big mountain skiing. Their guide is Hans Gmoser, who's the founder and owner of Canadian Mountain Holidays. Rudy Gertsch, another legendary ski guide, is their guides. Mom and Dad just got hooked in with this crew thanks to the Albrechts, who really were our skiing mentors. Mom and Dad were weekend warriors. Everything that they knew about skiing came from the Albrecht family or from the guides and what the mountains had to teach. They're using the Gertsch binding here, a plate binding that allowed for uphill travel with their skins. Well, Mom and Dad didn't know better. Everybody's using the Gertsch binding, so their kids are going to use the Gertsch binding. Well, my brother and I were downhill ski racers, and it was really embarrassing as a 10-year-old to be using that plate binding. But we did. To the left of Dad here is Margie Albrecht. Mom and Dad used to say that Margie was the best powder skier that they had ever seen. To me, Margie was like a second mom. She taught me how to sew, bake pies, how to breathe properly while hiking up at Mount Rainier. So I grew up with a black and white of this scene in our living room. This was a trip 1979 to Battle Abbey. Hans Gmoser was the guide. They helicoptered into the lodge where they stayed, and then they skinned up, earning all of these tracks. I called Margie to get a few more stories about these trips, and I tape recorded it. Here's Margie here, not talking about this particular trip, but some pretty historic moments.
Hello.
Good morning, Margie.
Hi. Hi.
Well, I've been looking at the movies that Mom and Dad had digitized. Margie, I've heard you talk about Hans Gmoser my whole life. I never fully understood the context. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't realize he was the founder of CMH.
Oh yeah. Because the people who were going ski touring, a lot of them were from Calgary, and they had money, and they got older and lazy. I mean, mostly lazy, and they just said, we're tired of this hiking up. Can't we get an airplane or something else? So that's how he got the idea and started. But Bob and I, we were on the very, very, very first time that Hans ever tried to do heli skiing, and that was in the Bugaboos, and it was just a logging camp. When we went there, they hadn't done heli skiing yet, so they didn't even know how much gas or whatever they call it, diesel or whatever they use, was going to be required. And so when we took off, we went from this little town, kind of by Briscoe, BC.
Okay.
Kind of by after Golden. Anyway, and when we got there, and the people there said, "What? Where are you going?" And it had been snowing and snowing and snowing all winter, and they hadn't even seen the mountains. And so then we went, and when we drove as far as we could, and then this kind of a cat thing pulled the guys. It was called a nodwell. And we finally got to this logging camp that that Hans had scouted out in the summer, and it was just, they had these little cabins, and they had a kind of a wood stove in it, and then they had a bigger cabin that was kind of the wood. It was where it was a cook shack, and so we had some dinner. There was a cook, a girl, a young girl. And then we went to bed. And in the morning, Hans came into our cabin, and he scraped the window. It was full of ice. It was totally clear. It was the first day of the whole winter that had been nice. And so when we started out with the helicopter came in, it was just a little one that had two passengers and the pilot. And so Bob and Hans were the first ones that went up to this mountain, and Hans didn't know where they were going to go, and they kind of scouted around. And so I think there were about 12 people. And so we had to take about, 6 trips till everybody got up there. And meanwhile, Hans and Bob were packing out a place for the helicopter to land, because the first time it landed, it was all this deep snow, and it was pretty chancy. And so anyway, at that time, Bob and I did not ever go in the helicopter together at first. The very first time we were, cautious. Then we got less cautious.
Right.
Anyway, when we tried to ski down, it was just absolutely bottomless snow because of the whole winter. And it was really exciting, but it was not easy skiing. But we made it, and one of the second guide, he was having more trouble than all of us.
Really? Yeah.
He was more of a downhill skier. Anyway, then everybody finally figured out we got down. And so that whole week was kind of, it was just, you really took your chance, because every place we landed had never been landed before. And so that was the first week. And the second week was when Brooks Dodge, and that's the week that everybody thinks of as being the first heli-ski week. But ours was really, really the first one.
That is mind-boggling to me, Margie. I never knew this story. I'm absolutely blown away. I'm emotional. Kind of crazy. I get emotional in hearing this. I mean, so Bob was the very first ride with Hans and the very first helicopter landing. And what was the location? Was that Yoho, Selkirk's, Bugaboos? Where was that?
That was the Bugaboos.
Bugaboos.
And they are really a spectacular area, because they have all these granite spires. And Hans had been in there in the summertime, and he did a lot of climbing, and he had a climbing school in there, which we went to the next summer. and so he kind of knew the area, but not in the winter, and especially when it had snowed so much beforehand. And so we went up there, and then we just somehow got down, but we had to carry our skins and stuff around our, in a belt pack or in something like that, or a pack, because we never knew whether the helicopter could come and pick us up wherever we ended up.
Wow.
Because we didn't even know where we were going to end up. It wasn't anything really steep. It was pretty steep at first, but nothing really, really steep, so it was okay.
Yeah.
And it was really fun, because we hadn't walked all the way up, but it's almost better when you walk. We decided that after the trip that when you walk up, then you know what you're going to go up or go down.
Yeah.
And also the guides know the snow conditions better also.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, when Bob and Hans took that very first helicopter trip up and landing, for them to have a sense of where to land and what would be an appropriate and safe pitch.
I know. It was really risky. I mean, it was kind of, it wasn't so very smart. And, Eric was young and little, and, that was not smart for us to do that. It was too risky.
That's why you chose to not go in the helicopter at the same time.
Okay, the Battle Abbey trip is now over, but another fun fact, of course, that I learned from Margie. She pointed out this Skiing Magazine 1973 article that was written by Dan Ford. This covered Mom's very first trip to the Canadian Rockies, Little Yoho. It was led by Rudy Gertsch, and Mom left Dad behind because he had an Achilles heel accident. Another good friend, Martha Cram, came along as well. But Mom was the first Armstrong to be written up in Skiing Magazine. Okay, gang, so this was a little bit of a retro way to enter into our new ski season. I have so much more of this type of footage from other trips from mom and dad, so maybe I'll make another video in the future. In the meantime, stay tuned.